in details, and we'll be seeing how those things would be implemented. So today we'll be discussing about the basic layout. That is, we'll be just having the introductory part. What is this subject? What is all about? And what are the benefits of these subjects? And by the end of this session, we'll be able to design these models very easily. Okay, so I'll just share my screen. I hope the slides are visible.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the name says object oriented design and modeling. Okay, we all are aware of object, what is design, and what is modeling. So we'll just discuss these things in detail so that we have an idea in our mind and the thoughts are clear. If you have any doubts, that would be solved by the end of this lecture. Okay, so let's discuss about the objects. Many times we have studied how what are objects, what are their properties, how they are linked with the entities. So we know that objects are the abstraction of real world entities. So the example is also there on the screen. With that, we can see we make a class, and from that class we can make as many as number of objects as we want, and through inheritance we can share the properties with the parent class, and at the same time the object, okay, objects can have their own properties. Okay, so in this subject, what would be the role of the objects? How these objects would help us to design a model? Okay, so whenever we come with a requirement of designing any software or anything, so the basic requirement is the basic step is that we have to go through what all entities would be involved in our project and what would be the objects which can be abstracted or which can be in link, or where the properties of the classes, or we can say the different properties can be encapsulated. So usually in an object we have data and code. Okay, so many a times you would have studied that the definition of object is abstraction of real world entity, or we can say it has been encapsulated. Okay, it is an encapsulation where it encapsulates data as well as code inside it, and it is many times referred as a single unit also. Okay, from the diagram we can see we have an entity, that is a person which has attributes name, age, and set name. Then at the same time we have objects of that particular entity, that is student, doctor, and engineer, and they have their own information or on their data and code. So in the coming classes we would write a code how these objects can be successfully implemented. Okay, these all things would be done. So this was all about object. Now when the objects are being created, when their encapsulation has been done, when the data has been gathered, when the code has been written, there comes the analysis phase. Now, what is analysis? The data, the information which we have collected is being analyzed, is being cross checked, is being investigated, is being monitored. Okay, why the analysis phase is very important? Uh, we can say that analysis phase plays a very important role, because when we are working on any project, when we are about to implement something and we are trying to frame out a structure for it, so in the analysis phase we cross check whether the information which is being collected is correct or not. Okay, it is useful or not, and the project which we are working on would these requirements would lead us to the correct direction or not. Okay, so we can say that it emphasizes an investigation of the problem and the requirements rather than a solution. Okay, see, it says rather than a solution. We cannot say that when the analysis phase is going on, everything would be perfect. This we have studied multiple times when we were studying about different models in the software engineering. Okay, but when we start working on it, when we start implementing, then we come to know, okay, this all things can be done perfectly. Okay, in the coming phases the things can be changed. So in the analysis phase, we can investigate, we can analyze, we can determine, or we can cross check all the things which are being gathered. So we can understand this with the help of an example. Many times we talk about the projects and projects. So let's take an example. If we'll be talking about the library system, okay, we are designing a software for library management. That is the best example, and we all have used library services many a time, so it can be easily understood, it can be easily clarified. So if we'll take an example that we have an computerized library information. Okay, from where you can take the information of the books available, what all books are there related with your subjects, with your topics, and how you can issue them, when to return them, and whether the required information, the data or the chapters which you want to go through are available in those books or not. Okay, that can be easily checked. So if we are talking about the information of the books present in the library, okay, so how would it help us? The analysis phase would help us to identify the requirements which would be needed while implementing this particular software or while writing a code. So in the analysis phase it will give us the clear picture. Okay, as in requirement analysis it would help us investigate the requirements. Okay, if I'm about to um, work on this project, if I am about to write a code for this library management, so what should be the requirement, what would be the needs? We have to look after the roles of everyone, the admin, the users, okay, and the storekeeper. So we would have to collect all the requirements which would help us to complete this task successfully. And the second point which would be important is the object analysis. Okay, the domain, the area, the field. Okay, so see, in the library we have many sections. We have computer science, we have electronics, electrical, mechanical, so many. So books are related to those areas, those fields, and inside those departments, in the inside those area we have sub branches. Okay, we have different subjects, so related to those subjects whether the books are available or not. Okay, and in those books whether the books available for the students have the informative content, whether it is related to their syllabus, because many times what happens, the prescribed book may not cover the whole syllabus of your subject. So what you do, you go and refer for more subjects, two and three subjects. Okay, not subjects, sorry, the books. You refer for a single subject, you refer two or three books. Okay, so in same way, analysis phase will help us to clearly establish, or we can say it will help us to identify whether what would be the exact requirements and how those requirements can be completed or they can be implemented. Okay, or how those things can be provided to the different users. So when we identify the objects, when we uh, gather information related to them, when we check them, when we try to establish connection between them. So the next step would be the designing. When the analysis is done, when the whole data has been collected, when it is about to processed. Okay, now we would be talking about the designing part, because a design, a layout, a framework would help us how the data transaction is being taking place, how the things are being fetched, how the data is being retrieved or stored or modified or deleted, updated. These all things would be clearly represented in a designing section. Okay, there would be different models which would help us to identify the working of the project in a correct manner. Okay, so next would be the designing part. Now, why design is required after, immediately after analysis? Okay, so see, when the requirements gathering has been done, so based on the data which we have collected, we'll see whether these would help us to give a logic or a conceptual solution that would fulfill our requirements. Means see, as we are would be talking about the project, as we want to write a code, so implement them. So before writing a code, we have so many phases, we all know that. Okay, so before implementation, before starting with the main part, this design would help us how the classes are being designed, how the objects are being extracted, how a function is being called. Those all things would be clear in the designing section. Okay, so for an example, we can say that it will give us a framework or a structure for a database, how data can be maintained. Okay, database schema, we can say that. Okay, and it will give us the description of the software objects, what would be the requirements, and ultimately it will help us with a design which could be easily and successfully implemented. So with this, we say that object design or database design. Okay, so usually you can see in the Google or in many documents it is being called as object oriented analysis. Also, it is being called as object oriented design, and many times in many documents you can see it is also called as database design. Okay, because you will be learning how database can be designed, how it can be upgraded, how it can be maintained. Now, we know that what is object, what is analysis, and what is design. Now, when these things, when these three terms come together, okay, so how they would help us in performing various things, that we'll see in this next slide. So, what is object oriented analysis and design? Or we also call it object oriented design and modeling. Okay, so the name of the subject starts with O, object. So in whole subject, we'll be talking about how objects are being defined, how they are being called, what is the concepts behind them, how these objects would help us to define the domain of the project. Okay, the area, how they will fulfill the requirements, how they can be called, how they are connected with the entities, okay, how they are doing their job. Well, those all things would be studied in detail. Again, I'll take an example of the library information system. Okay, so here the objects would include the books which are available. Okay, those books can be from different departments, different streams, and how they can be connected to a particular class, and what would be their properties. Those all things would be studied. Okay, now as we are talking about the library information system, that means it involves a software, though that software would make our job easy. Okay, now this software would can can be designed using a programming technique. Okay, that means we need to write a program so that the software can be designed. Now, for writing, for implementing this, we need to identify what would be the main things involved in this. Okay, so as we are talking about objects again and again, so this object oriented analysis and designing modeling would help us to identify the software objects and how they would interact with each other and how they will help us to fulfill the requirement. Okay, whenever we are designing any software, that means we have requirement, we want people to use it, we want to people to take its services, okay, maintain their database or anything. Okay, so as we are talking about the library management, library system, so it would help us how we can maintain the database. Okay, as we are talking about the library management, so that means it will have the information of the books, it will have information of the departments, it would have the availability, it would at the same time we can give the feedback. If we have any requirement for particular book, we can request that also. Okay, and whether the books related with the course are available or not. Okay, and if you are looking for a particular chapter, so it would help that whether that particular topic or chapter is available in the book which you are searching. Okay, so these all things would help us to make the working or the functioning of this software smooth, the software which we are thinking of designing. Okay, so this ODM will give us a design, a structure, and using that design we can easily implement it, can easily write a code for designing a particular software. So as we have already discussed about objects analysis and design, okay, let's take an example of a game and see that game would involve how many designing techniques. Okay, we'll be talking about a project, a design, a dice game, and we'll see if we are talking about a game, if we are talking about their objects. So to make a software, to make a game at different stages, at different phases, what all designing techniques would help us to complete this project. Okay, so on the screen you can see a picture of a dice. Okay, so in this we have a game. Okay, so this game is all about just having a dice and throwing it on the floor and see if the face value of the dice, of the two dice, gives us the value as 7. If total is received as 7, that means the player wins the game. Otherwise, the player loses it. Okay, so this is the task which we have to perform. Okay, now let's see what all cases would help us, what all designing techniques, designing method would help us to identify the requirements, to identify the objects, to see their concepts and how they can be integrated with each other. Okay, these concepts we have already studied in software engineering, so it would be now easy for us to understand. Okay, so let's see the layout of the different techniques which would help us to achieve our goal. So we can see that the example of dice game we are talking about, and we when we throw the dice on the floor, we the numbers which are being on the face should have a total of 7, and if it is 7, the player wins. Okay, so the techniques which can be used here is define use case. We can use use case, then domain model, which we will be discussing in the further slides, then interaction diagrams, and define design class diagrams. Okay, all together, these all techniques, these all models would help us to achieve the task of the dice game, designing a dice game and having constraint that when the total would be 7, then only the player would win, otherwise they lose. So let's focus on these points individually and understand how as an individual use case would help us to identify the objects and their collaboration and the communication between them, then how this domain model will help us, then how this interaction diagram would help us, how the objects are interacting with each other, or how's the output calculated or being obtained, and the design class diagram would help us to identify the properties or the operations or the functions involved in them. Okay, so we can see on the screen use case. Okay, so we have already studied about use case diagram and we know what are use cases and how the use case are being identified and how the data transactions between among them is being done successfully. Okay, so here they would they would help us to identify the stories, the activity, okay, or the you can call them as instance. Okay, so as we are talking about the game, so here it would help us to identify what exactly the work is going on. That means a game is being played and that game is dice game. Okay, so this, if we are talking about a project and we are talking about the use cases, the use case would help us to frame out a story, how the things are being done, how the game is being played, how the face value is being obtained, how it is being calculated. Okay, so it would give us a layout. So here the main thing is that it defines the story, the version. Okay, that means a a play of dice game. Okay, now what is actually happening? A player is picking those dice and rolling the dice. Okay, and if the face value totals 7, then win, otherwise lose. Okay, so the whole activity means whole functioning, how the things are being started, how the things are being calculated. Okay, so it will just give us a layout, a storyline. Okay, now based on these storylines, we'll see how a use case is interacting with the other use case and how is it leading us towards completing our goal. Okay, so this was the first step which was involved in the example that we were talking about, a dice game. So first was the use case. Now second would be the domain model. Domain model, how it would help us to reach the goal. Let's see. Now the next is domain model. Okay, now it would help us for creating the description of the domain. Okay, from uh, the objects you can see in the diagram, player 1. Okay, player 1 information, the name is being written. Now rolls dice. Okay, face value. Okay, and dice game. So the domain are being defined, what all things would be involved in this particular game. So you can see here we would require the concepts, the identification of the concepts, the attributes uh, required, and how the association among those classes would be done. Okay, so this would show Means see, it is just an introduction. So in the further classes we would see how those this domain model is being designed, how the concepts are being defined, how their attributes, their functions would be depicted on the screen, how their association, how the data flow is being taking place, how the association is being established, generalized, and so many things. Those all things we would see. Okay, so see, coming back to the topic, as we are talking about an example of the dice game. So first use case would help us to frame out the story, how the things are being happened, and the domain model would help us to identify the concepts behind this involved. Okay, it would help us to identify the attributes behind it and how the association is taking place. That all things will be done. Now, next would be interaction model. This we have already studied. So from the diagram, we can see the lifeline, the play, the how, as long as the game is being played, the lifeline would be there. Okay, so die one, die two values. Okay, if when die one rolls, the what is the face value? Get the face value means the value should be read and recorded in the database. Okay, and at the same time die 2 is rolled and its face value is being recorded in the database, and after reading out the values when they are being summed, okay, when the summation and the value is being done, so if the value obtained is 7, the game is won. Otherwise, the player loses the game. Okay, so this interaction diagram would help us to identify how the message between the objects are being carried out. Okay, how the communication is being, how the flow is going on. That would be studied in this interaction model. Now, next, after the interaction model, okay, when we have understood how the objects are uh, having a communication, and the communication is being established using message flow, message passing. Okay, messages are being sent, they are being received, and we are having a particular lifetime. Okay, we can see for how long a particular activity is being going on and whether it is successfully completed or not, and how the output is being gathered. That would be identified in interaction diagram. Now moving ahead, see, use case is over, domain model is over, interaction diagram is done. Okay, now next would be the class diagram. Okay, so before that, we'll see, again the example has been represented on the screen, and you can see that now see, now we have already designed the interaction diagram. Now how software would read this, okay, how this would be successfully implemented using the software. Okay, so assume that a software implementation of a dice game is designed. The interaction diagram illustrates the essential steps of playing. See, you can see in this the main thing is being only, okay, shown how the game is being played. Die one, die two, they are being rolled, and the value is being read. Okay, only the important points are being depicted, are being displayed. So, what is necessary, that is only being given. So here you can see how the send messages are being sent to instances. Okay, dice game, and the high, and how die classes are receiving those messages, and how the value would be read. That is being shown in this interaction diagram. Now, in the next, we'll see how this class diagram would help us to make it further successful. Okay, so in the class diagram, we can see dynamic view of collaboration objects shown in interaction diagram. It's useful to create a static view. Okay, Okay, class definition with the design class diagram. And in this, it would illustrate the attributes and the methods of the classes. See, after the interaction model, okay, it gave us a view how the things would be happening, how the classes, okay, the instances are interacting with each other by message passing. Okay, now this would help us to frame out a proper definition to define a class in a class diagram. Okay, because in the interaction model we saw how the interaction, how the communication is being established, how it is being taken, carried out successfully. So it would help us to identify the classes and their attributes and then make a class diagram so that it becomes more clear whether the requirements, the things, the information, the data which we have gathered is fulfilling the requirements for means the basic purpose of designing the software for which we were about to do this is being fulfilled or not. Okay, so this illustrates attributes. It would be defining, it would help us to define the attributes and the methods of classes. From this diagram we can see a class diagram has been drawn. Okay, and the interaction between them is being shown. So we can see a dice game in that we have die 1, die 2, and the function is pay. Okay, and in the die we have a face value and get face value. Okay, so like this, we would study how different models can be represented in pictorial form before implementation. That is all about in object oriented design and modeling. That means we would be studying designing methodologies, designing techniques which are available, and we would be studying all those techniques in depth, and we'll see how interaction among them is taking place, then how these diagrams would help us to implement the project successfully. Okay, so this was all about today's class. I would share the syllabus with you. I'll share the PPT with you, and I'll share the books which I have. Okay, in a single book, we don't have all the topics, so we may have to refer 2 or 3 books. Okay, for studying different modeling techniques and how those are being implemented and how the results are being generated. Okay, if you have any query, you can ask.
Ma'am,
Ha, Manaswini.
ma'am, will the school, college be reopened?
See, it depends totally on the government. Okay, see, we all are already in the college and we are taking your classes from here. But for the students, I may means I think it may take one more semester. For this semester, we don't have any orders. Till now, we did not receive any order or a notice from the government. So let's see.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am,
Huh, Prajwal?
ma'am, what language we are gonna use?
I was, I'm thinking of C++. plus plus. You can use whichever language you people are comfortable. Okay, because there is no restriction for implementation. For designing, we'll be studying the techniques, but for implementation, there is no restriction.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay, so if you people don't have any doubt, you can leave the class. Okay, we'll meet tomorrow then.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you, ma'am.
Well,
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
yeah,
Thank you, ma'am.
welcome.